Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Leadership in Politics with Dr. Abraham. With me today is an exceptional guest in everything he does, Mr. Bruce Rosenstein. Hello there. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on your
Thank
show.
you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for doing this. So, for those who don't know Mr. Bruce Rosenstein, please tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell your audience who you are and what you do.
Okay, well, I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area in a suburb called Rockville, Maryland, which is quite close in. And I've been in the D.C. area for many years, but I was actually born and raised in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which a lot of people know now because it's where Joe Biden was born and lived
Yes.
as a young boy. And also Hillary Clinton's father is from Scranton, so the name is quite in the news for those reasons. But I came here to DC area many years ago to study at American University. I studied communications there, and I never left. I never left the area. So I've done a number of different things in my life, and including in the very early years, working around the music business. I'm not a musician, but I was writing about music quite a bit, which I enjoyed. And this is rock music, by the way. Writing about music, and I also had a small mail order record company, and I had a small record label for a while with a business partner. But really, I was not cut out to do that. As much as I love music, I was not really. It was not my calling to do that sort of thing. So, for a variety of reasons, I got a master's in library and information science at Catholic University, also here in DC. And then shortly after that, I started working at USA Today newspaper. And I worked there
Okay.
for 21 years as a corporate librarian. And USA Today is based here in the Washington area. So I came in 5 years after they started and had a great career there for 21 years. And for the last 12 of those years, along with being a corporate librarian, I wrote about business and management books for the paper, including a lot about Peter Drucker. And so I was introduced to Drucker's work in a big way in a management class that I took at Catholic when I was getting my master's in library and information science. And it, that material on Drucker really spoke to me in a very deep way.
Mm-hmm.
So I really started studying his work just right at that time, which was in the mid 1980s. And it led up to the time when as I said, I'd written a lot, but it was about rock music, but I really transitioned into writing about business and management. And part of it was because of the whole Drucker connection. So I wrote about Drucker a lot for USA Today, but wrote about other people in the business and management world. And as part of that, I interviewed Drucker first not in person, but then in person in 2002 at a big library conference in Los Angeles that we were both at. The big difference was he was there as the keynote speaker. So, but we did a big interview, which became a USA Today feature story.
That was for the USA Today,
The USA
the interview you had. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's really what led to, because that went so well, that's what really ultimately led to me deciding to do the book. So, but in terms of kind of chronology, I had that great career, but all good things come to an end. So after 21 years, that USA Today career ended. But my first book came out right around that same time. So I was very fortunate that I had something my first of my two books came out in 2009. And then in 2011, 2 years after that, I became the managing editor of Leader to Leader, a journal that's co-published by Wiley and what's now called the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Forum in both New York and Pittsburgh. And I've been doing that for 9 years. So I also became a teacher. While I was working at USA Today, I developed a parallel career in teaching. So I was teaching, and I still am, as a matter of fact, in the library, in the master's program at Catholic in library and information science. So I started doing that in 1996. And now it's not quite as frequently for a variety of reasons, but pretty much now it's every other year. So I taught there last year, and I'll presumably teach there again in 2021. But again, this whole idea of having multiple things in your life, what Drucker called living in more than one world, and again, something that he really, as far as I know, in that terminology said only to me in one of our interviews conducted after that.
And that led to the first book in 2009, Living in More Than One World, right?
Okay.
So
Exactly.
tell me a little bit about that book in a minute or so, the premise of that book.
The premise of the book is that Drucker had done a lot of work about the individual as opposed to the organization, and most people knew him in terms of his work with the organization, but he hadn't really consolidated and put a framework around his work on the individual. He'd written a lot about it in a variety of books, but there wasn't one book in particular. Closest was The Effective Executive, but that was very, very business focused. As great a book as that was and still is. So I decided I'm going to put a framework around his work on the individual. I'm going to ask him these questions in my interviews with him. I'm going to do a lot of other research. So that is the framework. The framework is the individual, the various things that the individual can do to further their life and their career, but to try to do it in an organized way based on Drucker's material.
Principles. So in an effective way, the effective manager or the effective individual. And then in 2013, you cemented this theories and principles of Drucker in Create Your Future, the Peter Drucker Way. Tell me a little bit about this book.
So a similar approach in the sense that he had all these things about the future that he had said in interviews and in different books and whatever, but it was such an important part of his life, the whole concept of the future. But he, again, had never done one book just about the future. So I decided I'm going to do that book, and I'm going to put a framework around his work on the future, which he had never done. So I came up with 10 elements of the future. I still had some interview material left over that had not been used for the first book, so I incorporated that. I interviewed other people who had worked with him, who had studied with him. So in coming up with these 10 elements for the future, it was again through my voluminous study, interviews and otherwise my study. So it's not like Drucker sat down and said, these are my 10 elements of the future. He did not do that. I had to do that based on Drucker's work. And I was very careful about how I delineated all of this, because I felt it had to be very true to him. I felt I had to have documentation, for everything, because unfortunately he did not live to see my books. He didn't even know I had a book contract, which when you think about it was quite generous of him to take as much time as he did, knowing I was writing a book, but I didn't have a book contract at that point. And I didn't have one actually till well after he passed away. But it's very sad to me that he did not live to see my books. But I feel that if I must say so myself, I feel he would have enjoyed both of my books.
Well, we did enjoy your books, and this is, I think, true. He put the principles out, and true, you interviewed him, and true, you were one of the first to interview him. However, it's you, Bruce. It's you that through you, we students of management and leadership learned the Drucker way. You cherished his memories and legacy. Right. And we appreciate you for that. He put the principles true, but without you and your peer in Leader to Leaders, and without these books, Create Your Future the Drucker Way, and the principles that you share with us on a regular basis, whether on your posting on LinkedIn or Twitter or through your writing, is really what cherish and cement this legacy of Peter Drucker. And also through of course, we have the Drucker School at the in Claremont as well. And we appreciate you for that. Tell me a little bit about Leader to Leader.
By the way, I should really acknowledge, and as probably a lot of your viewers know, I'm certainly not alone in the world of Drucker scholarship. There's just been a number of people and organizations out there that do, further the legacy, and most of them are people that I know in person and have done, work in some way or another, that I do, want to acknowledge and further those people as well. Leader to Leader as a journal, it's been around for, as I might have said, for 25 years or almost 25 years. We're going to have our 100th issue in 2021, which is very exciting. I've been the managing editor since 2011, but it does have its roots in the Drucker world because in 1990, Francis Hesselbein who had worked a lot with Peter when she was CEO of the Girl Scouts before she retired. Peter did a lot of pro bono consulting for the Girl Scouts and worked very closely with Frances.
Mhm.
So when she retired, she and a couple of other people who had also worked a lot with Peter decided they were going to form Peter F. Drucker Foundation for Nonprofit Management.
Mhm.
The nonprofit management wasn't as well developed in 1990, 30 years ago, as it is today. So they convinced Peter to go along with this idea to not only lend his name, but to really put in, pretty fair amount of work um, in this. Now, they didn't start the journal for 6 years, but they did all these other activities. And also they put out books during this period. It was quite something. Now, I had written a couple of articles for Leader to Leader before I became managing editor. So, your viewers should know there's tons of Drucker-related content within Leader to Leader over the years, including articles that Peter wrote. It was before my time. But it's really only one part of what we do, because the concept of Leader to Leader is leaders writing for other leaders. So we see our audiences, our leadership in one form or another, any form, whether it's business, nonprofits, government, military. That's where our writers come from. So we don't use freelance writers. We don't have staff writers. And so our writers are these very high level leaders. And that's our readership. Although, obviously anybody can do it. So it's aspiring leaders, people who are just interested in the topic. So you certainly will find a lot of Drucker related things, but really there's just quite a bit of other things, going on in Leader to Leader. And it's a real blessing for me to be the editor, because I get to work with these people on a regular basis, get to work with Frances on a regular basis because she's editor-in-chief, I'm managing editor. It's really a blessing for me to be able to do this. I learn a tremendous amount on a daily basis by doing it. So again, all these worlds kind of come together. This is where this living in more than one world concept comes about. Drucker had his own way of doing it. I have my own way of doing it. So for me, part of it is, the work I do on Leader to Leader, the work I do, the social media work that you alluded to for my Drucker quotes and sayings and
principles, the daily principles,
daily
the Drucker way.
Right. So, which have really, caught on with people. And, the things I do for my books, which is not only social media and writing, but also doing presentations, doing workshops. And those things, by the way, continue in the online, in the era now. I mean, I love doing those things in person. And I for me, it was a big blow when we couldn't do them in person anymore. But just as you're doing, being able to do things through Zoom or what have you is certainly the next best thing. And so I keep up these sorts of activities, including doing workshops, but do them in the online era. And I try to stay in touch with people, just as Drucker stayed in touch with people. And also realize with all of this that I am very, very blessed to have done the work that I did with Drucker, because yes, lots of people can say that, but that was over a very, we had a 70 or 70 year career. But still, there are lots of people who I never got a chance to meet Peter, let alone to have done some work with him. So I realize that I'm very privileged, I'm very blessed. I never forget that I had opportunities that other people just did not have. So I'm very cognizant of that, and I never take those things for granted. I don't take the work I do for granted by any means, because for a number of reasons, but certainly one reason is I can remember back to, how hard it was to get a book contract. It was right around this time, 12 years ago, that I got my first book contract. That was years after I started working on the book. So even though I had worked with Peter and all that, it was still difficult to get a book contract.
Takes time, hard work takes time.
Yeah.
We appreciate you. The fact is, you know what you know. You met the man, but you didn't keep this to yourself. You shared it with others, and you continue sharing that with others. And as I said earlier, you cherished his legacy with other people, but you are on the helm of it. Leader to Leader is a prestigious journal, is a thought leader journal. Leaders that with forward thinking, not any, you don't just accept any article. It has
Right,
to be original. It has to be worthy of your readers.
right, right.
I thank you for your humility too, your humbleness, and
Well,
being approachable. You talked that Peter Drucker was like that, and you are like that. So thank you for being that, and continue being that. And I'm as a student of management, I'm learning to do that. I finished my master in management, my PhD in management, my bachelor of everything management. So I'm really a student of this discipline, and I'm learning along the way. As I interview these thought leaders, and I interview you and interview others, humility is the key to anything we do.
I agree.
Humility is the key to anything we do. You think he used empathy as part of his practice?
I think he did. I think, whether or not he called it that, or, used that kind of terminology. I mean, that terminology was certainly around when he was alive. Remember, he died actually quite some time ago now. He died in the end of 2005 when he was 95. So, yes, I mean, he cared quite a bit about people and the development of people. So I think that he wanted, if you were able to get into his world, and obviously not everybody could because everybody wanted to get into his world, but it was tough because he had so many things going on, so many different, responsibilities and duties. So, but if you were in that world, I found, and I observed from talking to people, yes, he was very empathetic and he wanted to know about you and he wanted to kind of know about the world that you operated in. When we did the USA Today interview, and of course that goes along with this, by the way, being generous with your time, whatever. So the very long USA Today interview we did, a 4-hour interview in Los Angeles, when when I came back to Washington, and as I said, USA Today is based in the Washington area, still is. My editors, after all, and we had a tremendous amount of taped material, but my editors still wanted to get some other, it just brought up other questions in their mind. And they said, do you think he would answer some additional material? And I said, well, I could certainly try. So what we did was we sent, and this is how we did some other things too, not the one in Los Angeles, but other things, where you would send him a fax. And he would then type up the answers and by himself, by the way, and fax them back to you. And I would say he was very good-spirited about that because he didn't have to do that. So he sent me 3 or 4 typewritten pages of additional material, which was quite something. He did not have to do that. He could have said, look, I spent 4 hours with you. I'm busy. I'm 92 years old. That's enough. But he actually did it. And I was very, we were all very thankful that, that he took the time to do that. So I think he was very empathetic to people. He wanted to know what would help. So I think he wanted to represent himself well. And he knew that USA Today had multi-million readers. So I think that he also realized that in order to come across, in the best way possible, that part of doing that was maybe just taking the extra half hour or whatever he did to answer those other questions, to make it complete in everybody's minds. And so I think that was, to me, also showed, some empathy. And I think that when he, just the fact that he gave me, 4 hours to begin with.
That's a lot of time.
A lot of time, especially when we had to give that keynote the next morning. Not that many people would have done that.
But listen to this. Listen, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but listen to this. 4 hours of his time back in 2005, right?
At that time it was 2002.
2002. Look what it led us. Those 4 hours of not necessarily empathy because you were established then, and you have a support network behind you that also brought his insights to others. But those 4 hours of time he provided you probably helped you then to establish a specific characteristics. I don't know of what it is, but it helped you to provide what you're providing now.
Good point.
Truly, I believe so. Because, I mean, it carried on generation, and you cherished his legacy.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good point. It's possible that, because I feel the article came out very well, it's possible that had he not given the full 4 hours and then that extra half hour or even longer in his typed up answers, it's possible the article might not have been as good.
Mhm.
And yet it came out very, very well. And by the way, we also had a great photographer, the top USA Today photographer in Los Angeles named Robert Hanashiro. I don't know if he's there now, but he was certainly the top guy then. And so Robert came along for the first part of the interview and shot some great photos.
Mhm.
So we had that as well. We had the visuals that went along with it that then went into the article. So lots of things that came together very, very well. Um, if he wasn't open enough about, open-minded and, kind of welcoming, if he could have very easily had the next morning on his mind. I probably would have. If I had to give a big keynote the next morning, I think that really would have been on my mind. And it might have been on his mind too. It probably was, but yet somehow he was able to give me these very detailed answers to
Mhm.
my questions in a very important way. And I had to go back and do, not only transcribe his what he said to me, but I also had to go back and some of the things that he said I had to look up because I did not know what they were. Like when he was telling me about the previous corporate scandals, I did not know. But then I found out, yes, he was certainly correct.
He brought an experience to you.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
there's a
he
lot
provided.
to
Mhm.
learn. Yeah,
Where can, well, let me tell you something as far as leader to leader. I teach for the University of Redlands. I'm a
right.
professor there as an MBA professor, organizational behavior. Our dean, Tom Horan, wrote an article, I believe, or some articles for your leader to leader. And I
That's
enjoyed purposeful leadership or the arc of the purpose for leadership.
right, exactly,
So
yes.
congratulations on that
Yeah,
article, on that.
thank you. It was great getting to work with Tom on that. And there's another case that we said about the connections with people. So, I very first met Tom when he was the dean of the Drucker School. So I met
Claremont, yes. Yeah,
right,
yes, he was there too.
him through the Drucker world and had a really enjoyable conversation in his office. And we stayed in touch.
He's a visionary leader. I like him.
Great guy to talk to, as you know. And so this is another thing with all these people that I've met through the Drucker world. So let's just say, when I met him, I was established in the Drucker world, but it would have been very hard for me had I not been established in some way
Mm.
to just, walk into the Drucker school and start, having these long conversations with people. It would not have happened. They wouldn't have the time. They wouldn't know who I was. They wouldn't know to trust me. So, very often when I work with my students who are in a much different field, they're in the library information science field, but there is some crossover. As I said, Drucker spoke, he gave a keynote to the librarians.
Hmm.
And, one of the things I tell them is that it's very important to become part of systems and networks so that your name becomes known and people trust you.
Hmm.
You have to be trustworthy, obviously, but it's very difficult to accomplish some of these things from the outside. You have to be involved in some way. And getting to know some of the key people in there, working, volunteering, whatever it is that does that is very important. And that's something, by the way, that Drucker did throughout his life.
Hmm.
If you look online at the Drucker archive, it's very fascinating. Things that I saw actually before the Drucker archives were put online, I was given access to look at these things. But all these different organizations that he did pro bono consulting for instance. Yeah, he connected people. He made connections. He was part of connections because everybody wanted some part of his time, which is obviously difficult. Even though he was very generous with it, he only had so much time, and people really wanted his time. But yes, he did make connections among other people.
Hmm.
There's various things that I believe are still in the Drucker archives that you can now see online that um, document some of that. So it was a very admirable part of his personality, I would say, part of his being, that he did that sort of thing.
Where can people find your books? Amazon is one of them?
Amazon, certainly, it's on all the online platforms. When they first came out, they were in bookstores, but as you know, it's very hard
It's very rare now to go.
in bookstores. Well, of course, now, yes, what's going on, but even generally nowadays, unless your book sells very, very well, it tends not to stay in stores. They'll order it for you, and they'll put it, for some people, and they'll put it on their website. So really, it's on all the platforms: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple, all those platforms. It's a Kindle. I'm talking about for both books, even though they're different publishers, by the way.
Are they also an Audible or audio as well?
They are.
Or not yet? They are.
The first book is in Audible format. The second book, I know it's on. I don't know if it's considered to be Audible. It might be considered to be the Audible format, but for the second book, unlike the first book, there was an audio version made right from the beginning. First book, that did not happen. It took years later, and then it got put on Audible. The second book, Create Your Future, the Peter Drucker way, we actually had a separate publisher called Brilliance Audio, which was part of it. It's owned by Amazon, but it's a separate publisher. And so we worked with the narrator of that book and the production folks. So they actually made it into beyond a digital file. So it's available in the digital file, but they actually made a CD of it. It's like multiple CDs. So that's available somewhere. So it's, to answer your question, both books are available in all sorts of formats. And even, by the way, and this is where I put in the plug for the library world, because I always try to plug the library world because I feel that the libraries are very, very important. So within the library world these days, especially through academic libraries, libraries tend to have very good online access to databases that really most people would not be able to get. But if you're a student, or in some cases part of a major public library, or maybe a corporate library, you do get access because you're part of the system. So a lot of times these types of libraries will have access to, well, one example is called Safari.com, SAFARI.com.
Okay.
And so what these folks do, which is a very valuable service, and I'm pretty sure my books are available that way, is you get to access certain parts of the book. So they have the full book online, but if you put in a keyword, like you only want to find out what I wrote about teaching and learning, let's say, and then you can go to that part of the book. And so it's a very great service that they offer. Now, I think they do offer the book. You can't just download it. They'll sell it to you as a download, but it's not like you can download the whole book. But you can, and I'm not even sure you can download the parts that you've accessed.
I'm looking for.
Yeah, but you can certainly get them that way. And Safari is a great source, and they have lots of different things. But generally, it's one of these things that's not available freely. You might be able to call it up on the web, but you'd have to have some sort of subscription, which very often these good libraries do. So again, putting in a plug for the library world.
Excellent. And you're always giving something back. That's your style. That's good. Bruce, Rosenstein.com. That's also your website?
Correct. Yes.
BruceRosenstein.com.
Leader to leader, I mean, the best way of doing it is it's on the Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, on their site. So there's a page on the Wiley site that if you go to wiley.com and type in leader to leader, it will come up, and you'll see a variety of things. Now, I will say it's a password protected publication. I mean, we're saying it's kind of written by leaders for
leaders.
In a very understandable way, though. It's not an academic. I mean, there's certainly a place for academic sort of writing, and I actually enjoy reading academic writing, but it's not meant to be that way. So it's meant to be almost kind of in a conversational style where leaders of one form or another are writing for other leaders. And I think if people go to our site and they look at the, let's say that free issue, the sample issue, we'll get a good idea of what our type of writing.
What it is all about.
Yeah.
So, Bruce Rosenstein, the entrepreneur, the
Thank
author, the professor, editor, right? The cherisher of the legacy. I'm going to give you that, in which you are. The cherisher of the legacy of the legend, Peter Drucker.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your insights, sir.
Well, thank you. As you know, I enjoy talking about this, and you're, very good interviewer. So I appreciate that, and I will certainly, once this is available online, I'll certainly share it on my social media channels
Definitely. I'll
and help,
tag you.
not only attention to my work, but to your work as well,
Thank you.
because you're doing important stuff. I know how hard it is to find the right sort of people to do this sort of thing, and then to try to do these interviews online. And so I salute you for doing that. And again, I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because I feel that there's many different strands to this work.
Anything else you want to add?
No, just thanks. And people like this, again, contact me. People can contact me through my website. I think you'll find a lot of information that I've linked to on my website about not only Drucker, but all sorts of other things, including my blog. Please check me out on social media and Twitter and what have you. And I think you'll find a lot of interesting material there. And so again, thanks for the opportunity for being with everyone today.
Indeed, of course. Thank you.
You're welcome.